People keep asking if I'm back, and I haven't really had an answer. But now, yeah, I'm thinking I'm back!
That's right. I'm back. Welcome once again to the Crypt. I am your tour guide through the land of lost and forgotten horror films. On our visit this time, we witness a true tale of horror.
Do you remember the first person you ever killed?
I don't know. Never asked her name. Nothing sort.
Now you'd like to do her now, wouldn't you?
Which one?
I know the guy's crazy. What I want to know is, can we believe this nut? He said he's killed over 200 people. Just when did you do all that?
Just all the time.
In the eyes of a stranger, in the hands of a drifter, there is no mercy.
Seems like killing for me is just like breathing for everybody else. Just can't live without doing it all the time.
Now don't let the awful video box art deter you from Confessions of a Serial Killer. Yes, it has nothing to do with Silence of the Lambs, and the cover art is basically a poor choice made by the distribution company. But it's not a bad movie at all. In fact, it's one of the best serial killer movies to focus on a real-life person. The movie is based on the same real-life case that the more well-known film, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer, was based on. The comparing of the two movies together, one is struck by how similar the movies are. A rip-off, you're probably saying. Actually, there doesn't seem to be any indication that the makers of Confessions were imitating Henry. Though it is true that Henry was made in 1986, a year before Confessions, Henry actually wasn't released until 1990 because of the burden of its X rating. So the makers of Confessions made this very similar movie without any knowledge of Henry, which is quite a coincidence. It's also quite a coincidence that cult-famed filmmaker Roger Corman shelved the 1987 movie for several years as well. It was made by Concord Pictures, possibly for a theatrical release, but released in 1992 on New Horizons home video. Could it be that the distributors of this movie also felt there would have been problems with a theatrical release? The movie shows us the life of Daniel Ray Hawkins, who tells his life story in a series of confessions during interrogation by a small-town police department. Actor Robert Burns, the art director for tons of cult-favorite films such as The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Tourist Trap, The Hills Have Eyes, The Howling, as well as Reanimator, makes a rare and only lead actor appearance, bringing a menace to a role inspired by the real-life maniac Henry Lee Lucas. Whereas Michael Rooker was somewhat handsome, if bent, in Henry, Burns captures a more true version and matches Henry Lucas's dopey, redneck-looking self. Burns carries himself with the quiet meekness of a man with no imagination, no ambitions, which allows him to sidle up next to strangers with relative ease. He comes off too dumb to be any harm, which is how the real-life killer was described.
Look at Henry. He's pleasant, he's non-threatening, and actually a killing machine.
Daniel Ray explains his story in flashbacks to a grizzled sheriff played by Berkeley Garrett, who was in the movie Cloak and Dagger, as well as the Willie Nelson Western Red-Headed Stranger.
His game is make-believe. Their game is murder, spying, and sabotage.
This is starting to get good.
What?
Just like Cloak and Dagger.
Now any move could be his last.
Trying to kill us.
Come on, this is Cloak and Dagger. For real, it's what you always wanted.
Cloak and Dagger.
Now playing at a theater near you. Consult your local listing.
He plies the killer with cheeseburgers and milkshakes in the hopes of getting Daniel Ray to confess to a spat of unsolved killings throughout the country. There's a scene where the sheriff and Daniel stop for lunch at a car hop. They've been driving around to various locations in the countryside, trying to pinpoint areas Daniel Ray might have dumped bodies. The murderer munches on burgers and telling the sheriff he hopes that he can help solve these cases and bring closure to the families, because then his life would have some purpose. Seconds later, he winks at the waitress, who doesn't see his handcuffs right away. The flattery she felt curdles, and Daniel Ray tells her, "If they hadn't already caught me, you'd be mine." During his killing spree, he was joined by another like-minded guy named Moon Luton, who is of course based off of the real-life partner of Lucas, Otis Toole, played by actor Dennis Hill, who was also in the film The Red-Headed Stranger, and only a few other roles. Interestingly, Hill was a retired Austin police detective, with a 25-year career in law enforcement, as well as a professional artist of landscapes, seascapes, and Western art, until his death in 2014 with a battle of cancer. Also joining the killing duo was Moon's sister, Molly, played by Sydney Brammer. Moon, who has become bored with the nudie magazines he picks up at gas stations, tells Daniel Ray that they should get a camera and make their own. Now, the key to having even the slightest grasp of insight on someone like Daniel Ray is observing the way he reacts to this suggestion. He's unmoved. Hawkins, a passive, unemotional man, tells the authorities about his life, starting with him growing up with a sluttish mother and a paralyzed father, who killed himself after Hawkins' mother kept bringing in men into the house for her desires. Hawkins' first kill was when he was a teenager, and a local prostitute rejected him. He then grew into a drifter who drove around the country and randomly kills people, mostly women. Then much of the remainder of the movie deals with Hawkins' relationship, in more ways than one, with the equally insane Moon and Moon's sister Molly. This movie is directed and written by Mark Blair, which unfortunately is his only directing credit. Blair sets up scenes like Tobe Hooper did in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, by suggesting there is more violence than what we actually see. The sequence where Hawkins clubs a prostitute to death is directed so that, for the most part, we just hear the clubbing. Some murders happen off-screen, as we see Hawkins fire a shot from a doorway into a room with a victim we don't see get killed. Also, Blair understands that shooting a scene in silence can make it more atmospheric. For example, a sequence when the contents of 3 shoeboxes are uncovered is done with no dialogue, and the implications of these contents sink in deeply because there's nothing to distract us. But most scary of all is how Blair creates a sense of helplessness. We see that anybody can be a victim, anywhere, anytime, and shows that there is always a situation where we are helpless. One of the keys to a movie like this is how believable your villain is. Robert A. Burns does an outstanding job as Hawkins. He looks creepy and wisely acts in an understated manner, telling the authorities what he's done in a matter-of-fact tone. Burns also narrates his flashbacks, and without snarling, growling, or making gratuitous statement, he manages in a tone of voice to show his character's deep hatred of women and his utter lack of humanity. It's too bad that this role was Burns' only lead acting gig. It's clear from this movie that he deserved a more upfront roles. Also, Burns was the production designer, and with Blair's direction gives this movie the gritty look and feel it needs. This is a case where slick design and direction would have been disastrous. Though it's clear that they were working on a minuscule budget, they actually used it to their advantage. Seeing no-name stars in locations that are more accessible to audiences give this an even more convincing feel. The movie is actually an improvement over Henry, in that it takes some time to show us the central character's life in his early years, showing what helped shape the cold-blooded killer. Blair ends the movie in a way that has us wondering, my God, what now? This movie may not be as well known as Henry, but it is a better movie. So much so, that if released first, Confessions of a Serial Killer might be the movie that's talked about, while Henry stayed in obscurity that Confessions unfortunately is in now. Burns and director Mark Blair managed to capture the gritty and brutal VHS films that unsettled so many of the children in the 80s. On a sad note, Robert Burns committed suicide in 2004, shortly after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. He was 60 years old. I just want to say thank you to my fans of the channel. And if you're new to the channel, I hope you come back for more. And I promise to be more regular with my videos. Life here at the crypt became a bit overwhelming, and I lost sight of my film passion. But I'm back. So join me again at the crypt. I'm Gory G. Thank you, and goodbye for now.